sheriff's deputy had the weary, hollowed-out look of a man who had been called to settle one too many petty neighborhood disputes in Faisalabad. He stood in the sweltering Punjab sun, looking from me to the small, colorful, hand-painted sin I was nailing to my fence, and then to the woman who was having a full-blown public meltdown on my lawn. "It's an unapproved aesthetic modification, officer," she shrieked, her voice a shrill instrument of pure theatrical rage, echoing across the perfectly manicured lawns of Goldberg Greens. It was Ms. Anisa, the president of the Goldberg Greens Homeowners Association. She was waving a thick 3-ring binder like a weapon. She doesn't even have a permit from the Architectural Review Committee. She is a defiant, non-compliant squatter, and I want a stop work order and a citation issued immediately. I stood there in my own driveway, hammer in hand, my heart hammering against my ribs, feeling the situation spiral completely out of my control. The deputy, a young man just trying to do his job in the blistering heat, was looking at me then, at Ms. Anisa's binder of rules, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. She had a book of rules. She had a title. She had the air of authority. She just had a small hand-painted sign and a story he hadn't heard yet. He was going to side with her. He was going to shut me down. She had successfully weaponized the local law to control my own private property, and that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment of utter infuriating helplessness, you have to understand my late grandfather, and you have to understand the piece of paper he left me. My name is Zara. For my entire adult life, I've been a landscape architect, specializing in sustainable native plant designs. My world is one of organic growth, of ecological balance, of allowing nature to flourish. I believe that true beauty lies in harmony, not in rigid artificial control. My grandfather, a brilliant but eccentric botanist, was a man cut from a similar cloth. He was a fiercely independent and deeply private man who had lived for 60 years in a charming, traditional Punjabi farmhouse, nestled on a toker plot of fertile land, surrounded by a beautiful grove of old mango and jamun trees. He was a force of nature, a man who had politely but firmly resisted all attempts by the modern world to encroach on his quiet, simple life. He created a botanical wonderland, a vibrant ecosystem teeming with local flora and fauna. When he passed away last year, he left me the farmhouse. It was the single greatest gift I had ever received. It was more than a house. It was a living legacy, a testament to his passion for nature. Along with the keys, his lawyer handed me a heavy leather-bound portfolio, cracked and softened with age. Inside was every document related to the property, including the original handwritten deed from 1955. Its Urdu script faded, but its elegant calligraphy still perfectly legible. The wax seal of the Deputy Commissioner's office still intact. It was to me a work of art, a piece of local history. The problem was that in the 1990s, the surrounding agricultural land had been sold and developed into an exclusive, gated community called Goldberg Greens. My grandfather's toker property was now a hole in the donut, and in holding geographically inside the community's boundaries, but legally and fiercely independent of it. His old winding dirt road was the only access point to the back half of the entire development, and the new warden of this sterile, manicured world was the HOA president, Ms. Anisa. Ms. Anisa was a woman who saw the world in black and white, things that conformed to her vision of perfect artificial suburbia and things that needed to be eliminated. My grandfather's rustic farmhouse, with its wild, untamed garden and its traditional mud-plastered walls, was in Ms. Anisa's eyes a declaration of war against everything she stood for. Her welcome to the neighborhood a week after I began the slow, emotional process of moving into my grandfather's home was a perfect example of her tyrannical style. She marched up to my door, not with a tray of mythi, but with the thick, intimidating binder of HOA rules and a bill. "Hello," she'd said, her voice devoid of any real warmth, her silk shalwar kameez perfectly pressed. "I'm Ms. Anisa, the president of the HOA. We are all so thrilled that this property will finally be brought into the 21st century. Here are the community covenants. I've highlighted the sections on approved paint colors and landscaping materials. This, she said, handing me a crisp invoice, is the new member. Buy-in fee and the first month's dues. Welcome to Goldberg Greens. I was taken aback by her sheer, unmitigated gall. Thank you, Ms. Anissa, I'd said. My voice as steady as I could make it. But I think there's a misunderstanding. This property is not, and has never been, a part of the Homeowners Association. Her perfectly made-up face tightened. I'm sorry, what? She said as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language. This is an in-holding property, I explained. It predates your development. It was never incorporated. I will not be joining, and I will not be paying any fees. The look she gave me was one of pure, venomous disbelief. I had not just refused her, I had questioned the very foundation of her authority. I had, in her small, sad world, committed heresy. We'll see about that, she'd hissed, and stormed off, her expensive heels clicking angrily on my traditional brick pathway. The war had begun. The first barrage came in the form of letters. A formal letter from Ms. Anissa, followed by a much more intimidating one from the HOA's high-powered law firm in Lahore. They were claiming, in a masterpiece of convoluted legal fiction, that because my property was located within their geographical boundaries and benefited from the ambient security and prestige of their community, it was therefore implicitly subject to their rules and regulations for the preservation of community character and property values. They were, in essence, trying to invent a legal reality through sheer force of will. I was a landscape architect, not a lawyer, but I knew my history. I trusted my documents. My deed was a clear, simple, and legally binding truth. Their argument was a fantasy. I had my own lawyer, a quiet, methodical man like myself, send a polite but firm letter back, reiterating my property's legal status and respectfully telling them, "Get lost, Ms." Anissa's response was to escalate from legal threats to a campaign of petty, grinding harassment. The violation notices started appearing, taped to my historic wooden door. Fine for the non-uniform color of my door, which was painted a traditional, vibrant blue, the same color it had been for 60 years. Fine for my overgrown and unmanaged native garden, the one my grandfather had cultivated as a biodiversity hotspot, which Ms. Anissa deemed a fire hazard and breeding ground for pests. The letters became more frequent, more aggressive, the fines piling up into the tens of thousands of rupees. My inner monologue was a constant battle. Part of me was terrified. It's the legal threats, the constant feeling of being watched, the financial pressure. It was a heavy burden. But another part of me, the part that had inherited my grandfather's stubborn, independent spirit, was enraged. This was my home, my legacy, and this petty tyrant was trying to bully me out of it with a binder of made-up rules. The real flashpoint came when I decided to revitalize my grandfather's old mango grove. It was a beloved community landmark before the HOA. I wanted to add a small, traditional swing set, beautifully crafted from local teak, beneath the largest mango tree for neighborhood children to enjoy. I also decided to put up a small hand-painted sign in beautiful Urdu calligraphy that read, "Grandfather's Grove, a place of peace and nature for all." I thought it was a lovely tribute and a welcoming gesture to the few neighbors who were actually friendly. The day I put up the sign, a neat, small, beautifully painted piece of wood, Ms. Anissa was there in minutes, as if summoned by a disturbance. In the force of beige conformity, she had a full-blown meltdown on my lawn. "What is this?" she shrieked, pointing at the sign as if it were a symbol of anarchy. "That is an unapproved aesthetic modification. It's a violation of our signage guidelines. And you have not submitted a plan to the Architectural Review Committee." Is an illegal installation, Miss Anissa?" I said, my patience worn down to a single frayed thread. "For the last time, this is my property. Your rules do not apply here. And this is a welcoming sign, not an advertisement. You will be hearing from our lawyer and from the police," she screamed, and sped off in her expensive SUV, leaving me shaking with a mixture of anger and exhaustion in the oppressive, Heat. I felt like I was a prisoner in my own home, unable to even put up a simple sign without this woman's insane interference. I decided I had to end this once and for all. I called the HOA management company and scheduled a formal time to address the board at their next monthly meeting. I was going to bring my original deed, my grandfather's documents, and I was going to put an end to this madness. But Ms. Anissa couldn't wait. She had to have the last word. The day before the scheduled meeting, she saw me out by the mango grove, admiring the swing set. And she made her final, fatal move. She called the county authorities, claiming I was performing unpermitted public installations and attracting undesirables to the community. And then, for good measure, she called the local police, claiming I was a public nuisance who was engaging in illegal construction, in defiance of the community's legal authority. And that brings us back to that terrible moment on my driveway. It's a young, overwhelmed deputy, the screaming HOA president, and me, a quiet woman with a small hand-painted sign, being told I had to remove it from my own property. It felt like she had finally won. She had successfully used the real authorities, the county and the police, to legitimize her own, completely imaginary authority. "I was defeated, ma'am," the deputy said, his voice polite but firm clearly, trying to de-escalate the situation that Ms. Anissa was actively escalating. "I'm not a planning officer, and I'm not an expert on HOA rules, but we have a formal complaint. For now, I'm just going to have to ask you to remove the sign until you can get this civil matter sorted out with the Homeowners Association, Ms." Anissa's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had done it. She had used her power, her aggression, her lies, to stop me cold. She had won, but I had one more move to make. "Officer," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "I understand. I will, of course, comply with your request for now. However, this matter will, in fact, be sorted out tomorrow evening. I am scheduled to address the HOA board at their monthly meeting. Perhaps you would be interested in attending as well, just to witness the final resolution." The deputy looked surprised, but he nodded. "Okay, ma'am. That seems reasonable." The next evening, I walked into the HOA's ridiculously opulent clubhouse. The room was tense. The air was thick with hostility. Ms. Anissa was sitting at the head of the long, polished table, flanked by her board of directors. She looked smug, confident, and utterly victorious. She opened the meeting with a long, self-congratulatory speech about the importance of maintaining community standards and the unfortunate but necessary actions that sometimes had to be taken against non-compliant residents. She publicly shamed me for the illegal installations and the forced but necessary intervention by the police department. The other residents, most of whom only knew her side of the story, nodded along, looking at me with expressions of disapproval. When it was finally my turn to speak, a profound and satisfying calm settled over me. I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to plead. I was there to present a primary source document. I walked to the front of the room carrying the heavy, old, leather-bound portfolio my grandfather had left me. "Good evening," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the silent room. "My name is Zara, and I am the owner of the farmhouse at Plot 12, Goldberg Greens Road. There has been a great deal of misunderstanding regarding my property, and I am here tonight to clear it up once and for all." Carefully opened the portfolio, and with the reverence of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact, I pulled out the original 16-9-year-old deed to my property. I didn't just hold it up. I walked over to the overhead projector at the front of the room and gently placed the delicate, linen-based paper on the glass. And suddenly, projected onto the large screen behind me for the entire room to see, was a masterpiece of history. The beautiful, handwritten Urdu calligraphy of the original grant, the clear property lines drawn by hand with a surveyor's meticulous care, the official, embossed wax seal of the Deputy Commissioner's office from 1955. The room was filled with a collective, quiet gasp. I then took a second document, a modern, laser-printed document I had had my lawyer pull from the Faisalabad district Revenue Office that very afternoon, and placed it on the projector next to my deed. This I said, pointing to the beautiful antique document, is the legal instrument. Filed with the District Revenue Office in 1955 that created my property. It defines its borders. It defines its rights. It is a legally binding senior declaration of ownership. And this, I said, pointing to the modern sterile document, is the Articles of Incorporation for the Goldberg Greens Homeowners Association. Filed in 1990, I then drew their attention to a specific paragraph in their own founding charter. As you can see from your own legal framework, the Goldberg Greens development was legally defined by the county as consisting of platted lots 1 through 100. As described in the 1989 master plan, my property, as has been a matter of public record for over 6 decades, is Plot 12, not Lot 1 to 100. It is a completely separate legal entity. I let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final, quiet, and absolutely devastating blow. I turned to face Ms. Anissa. His face had gone from a mask of smug confidence to a pale, crumbling ruin of disbelief. You have been fining me, harassing me, slandering my name, and attempting to place an illegal lien on my home for not following the rules of a club that I am not, and never have been, a member of, I said, my voice no longer shaking, but filled with a cold, hard clarity. You have no more legal authority over my property than you have over the monsoon clouds. Your fines are fraudulent. Your liens are illegal. Your authority is, and always has been, a complete and utter illusion. This, I said, turning and tapping the image of the old, powerful, and beautiful deed on the screen, this is the law. And you and this entire board have broken it. Furthermore, a careful review of the original plot maps shows that the road used to access the entire back half of your development, including the community's main park, actually runs directly through my property. And as the legal landowner, I hold the right to grant or deny access, or for repeated trespass and harassment, to charge a usage fee. The room was in stunned silence. The other board members were staring at Ms. Anissa with looks of pure, unadulterated horror. They were not just seeing a woman who had been proven wrong. They were seeing the massive, catastrophic legal and financial liability she had just exposed. Every single one of them, too. They were also realizing that the only road to their precious community park and half their expensive homes was, in fact, my private property. Ms. Anissa was completely and utterly broken. Her power, which was built entirely on a foundation of bluff, intimidation, and the ignorance of her followers, had been vaporized in an instant by the simple, quiet, and undeniable truth of a 16-9-year-old piece of paper. The aftermath was swift and decisive. My lawyer followed up the next morning with a formal demand letter, required the HOA to formally and publicly rescind all fines and fees, to issue a formal public letter of apology for their campaign of illegal harassment, and to pay for every single cent of my not inconsiderable legal fees. They agreed immediately and unconditionally. The story of the meeting, of the old deed on the projector, became the stuff of legend in Goldberg Greens. Ms. Anissa was a pariah. She was forced to resign from the presidency in disgrace. She and her husband put their house up for sale a month later and moved away, unable to face the daily humiliation or the inevitable massive legal and financial reckoning that was surely coming from the homeowners whose property values she had just unwittingly destroyed. This whole miserable, stressful, and ultimately triumphant ordeal taught me a lesson I had spent my life studying from a distance, but now understood in my bones. People who build their power on a foundation of made-up rules, on binders full of amendments and subsections, are terrified of the real rules. The simple, powerful, and enduring ones. Ms. Anissa was so obsessed with her binder of bylaws that she never bothered to check the one simple 16-9-year-old document that superseded all of them. The truth in the end is always the ultimate authority. In history, I can now say with certainty, always gets the last word. The new HOA board is terrified of me and leaves me in complete and utter peace. They've even started a dialogue about how I manage my native gardens. But Ms. Anissa, in a final act of pure spite before she left, quietly filed a formal complaint with the Department of Archaeology, claiming my farmhouse is an unregistered historical monument and demanding it be immediately seized and converted into a public museum, thereby removing it from private ownership.